Yeah, it's pretty rare. It's from a CBC News documentary on Osama bin Laden called Osama bin Laden Wages War Against the United States. I don't know the year which this was published, but I was going through some old video files and I saw this, and it's like I said, it's not been seen by many people, but it's only 7 minutes long, and we're going to play the whole thing and see what comes from it.
Intelligence agencies during the investigation of the first World Trade Center bombing. His name appeared on a list of suspects who might have financed the operation. At the time, bin Laden had taken up residence in Sudan under the protection.
Now, a lot of people want to say, how the FBI find out about bin Laden's name? Well, Frank Pellegrino from the New York Task Force basically found a wire transfer from Khalid Sheikh Mohammed to Mohammed Saleh, I think it was for $5,000. Bin Laden back in 1993 was not known really much to the FBI, but he was known to the CIA, he was known to the NSA as well, and they known about him since probably the late 80s or mid 80s during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, because his name was he was a prominent figure in the war due to the fact that he was providing millions of dollars to the Mujahideen, and he built a services center where they would recruit and train young men to fight in the war. And it was basically for Arabs. And since Arabs made about 10% of the fighting force in Afghanistan, this center became the headquarters for jihadists around the world to come and fight against the secularists in Afghanistan. And then long after the Soviets uh, got out of Afghanistan, you had I think it was a civil war between the communists, the factions of Gulbuddin Hekmatyar and Abdullah Rasul Shayef, and as well as the Uzbeks, Waziristan, and Northern Alliance. And soon enough, it just became the Northern Alliance against Gulbuddin Hekmatyar and the Taliban. So this really was worse than the 10-year war with the Soviets in Afghanistan. And the United States took a lot of the blame because they just left the country. Yeah, they gave all the weapons to the Mujahideen. Now, this is quite similar to what we're seeing in present day Syria and Ukraine, by the way, where we send billions of dollars in military aid to these right wing separatist groups in Ukraine and the ultra Orthodox Salafist groups that make up organizations like Al Qaeda, Abu Sayyaf, Jabhat Islamiyah, and then later on, Islamic State Levant, Jabhat al Nusra, all these groups, uh, where they came from was the essence of this operation, which was run by the CIA called Operation Cyclone. And it was, there was a couple of agencies involved, like the Pakistan ISI, and this is how bin Laden got to be known to the intelligence services because they basically didn't work with him. Because one thing people say, well, the CIA hired bin Laden. No, that's not true. Dr. Ayman al Zawahiri, the co emir of Egyptian Islamic Jihad, later the emir of Al Qaeda, wrote a book called Knights Under the Prophet's Banner. It's based in Arabic, but I have an English translated version. And he states that uh, Arabs would not be friendly to NGOs. Yes, they take their money through a proxy group, and that proxy group was the Pakistan ISI. And so the funding, indirectly went to people like bin Laden, but it went through the Maktab al-Khidmat as well, which is the Afghan Services Bureau, which went to the Afghan warlords who either hoarded the money or gave little to the Afghans themselves. But the Arabs were getting their financing from the Maktab al-Khidmat
Of
offices.
the Islamic fundamentalist
It'll pause every once in a while.
regime there.
See this man in the white hat? That's Hassan al-Turabi, leader of the National Islamic Front. The president is Omar Bashir, president of Sudan. Sudan was the only country in the world that would take in foreigners without a passport. This is the reason why bin Laden and members of the Egyptian Islamic Jihad went to Sudan. That's why they went there.
I think I probably heard about Osama bin Laden in 1993 for the first time. And the CIA, whenever it reported about activities of a man named Osama bin Laden, would say Osama bin Laden, comma, terrorist financier, comma. And we began asking in 1994, let's take a closer look at this guy, because his name pops up in a lot of places. He may be doing more than just writing checks.
Glenn was a very polarizing figure. I mean, he was out there front and center, and he wanted to be. He wanted to be the man that defied against the West, against Israel, right? Whereas Al Qaeda today is very opposite. And under the tutelage of the Taliban, um, they basically are now more underground. This makes them far more dangerous than when bin Laden was around. And Al Qaeda is basically regrouping in Afghanistan currently.
By 1996, Osama bin Laden had moved to Afghanistan and called upon the Muslim world to wage war against Americans. The CIA had formed an entire unit devoted to following bin Laden and Al Qaeda. The first chief of the CIA bin Laden unit was Mike Scheuer.
By the end of
A
'96,
little bit, let me just put this a little bit too. The CIA built a station called Bin Laden Issue Station, which was codenamed Alec Station. Alec named after the son of Michael Scheuer, the first station chief. David Nevin is Cohn is the initial founder of the Bin Laden Issue Station, and knew that Scheuer was an expert in international terrorism. And he spoke, I think, Farsi or Arabic, and he was really qualified for the job. So they picked the right guy to basically grab intelligence. Now, here's the thing about the Bin Laden Issue Station. Usually information comes from CIA's field officers. There are two types of CIA personnel. There are analysts who work in base stations all around the world, and there are field officers. Field officers are people that are out in the field collecting human intelligence and even signals intelligence. And they provide this intelligence to their base station. Their chief of station then sends that information to the analysts in Langley, where they make decisions based upon the intelligence. Here you have a very unique group of people. They don't have field officers for bin Laden. Their intelligence is coming from wherever around the world regarding bin Laden. Other agencies, sometimes field officers, but this was run by analysts, the whole station. So Scheuer hired people like Tom Wilshire, who was the deputy director of Bin Laden Issue Station, Alfreda Ambikowski, who later on became his wife. She was in charge of hiring people. And then he hired people like Michelle Ann Casey, and then later on other FBI agents. When David Cohn's idea was to have the CIA, the FBI, the NSA, all work together and share intelligence about this one individual based on one person, Osama bin Laden. Big name in international terrorism. Who is this guy? What kind of organization does he run? He's from a wealthy family. So this guy's a danger. He's a threat to US interests. But the problem in the Bin Laden Issue Station was egoism and also fraternal fighting. These agencies don't like each other. They're competing. The FBI has its own counterterrorism network in New York, which is the most experienced out of all three. You have the NSA, who basically just deals with signals intelligence. That means emails, phone calls, listening devices, and the CIA, which basically does human and signals intelligence. The FBI doesn't do international investigations, but they will if it is in the threat or if it's a threat to US security interests or to the national security of the country. So the FBI basically was considered like the lead man out. Is the CIA was front and center because they're an international agency, not a judicial agency. That would be the United States, and then the NSA.
It was apparent that Bin Laden was much more than a tall Saudi spendthrift, that he was a very articulate man and a very much a odd combination of a medieval theologian and a 21st century CEO. He was someone who could manage an organization and drive it toward particular goals.
In the next few years, Osama bin Laden methodically built up al-Qaeda. In 1997, he opened his training camps near Khost, Afghanistan.
Now remember too, al-Qaeda was really big on propaganda videos. They learned this from the Haqqani Network, which is an offshoot Taliban group based in Pakistan, right? And what they found out was that the Al-Qaeda, which is the prominent agency in regards to propaganda videos, basically saw that by showing, these videos of these men training in training camps, conducting operations or preparing to conduct operations, this was really invigorating for a young mujahideen fighter or a young jihadist who was willing to take the fight against the plight of Muslims around the world toward the West, because the West was seen as the enemy, the West meaning the United States and Israel and their coalition partners. So basically, bin Laden used to send out a lot of these videos, and it really did help in terms of recruiting, because between the years 1999 and the year 2000, Al-Qaeda recruits were jumping at this point.
Mujahideen from all over the world arrived to receive elaborate military instruction. Bin Laden invited journalists and camera crews to visit his camps, and he even demonstrated his prowess with an AK-47 assault rifle. In May 1998, Osama bin Laden called a press conference to announce he was joining forces with the Egyptian group Islam.
I mean, think of it like this. It was unheard of for a man who is so polarizing, so rich, to be in the caves and living frugally, and to conduct interviews with CNN, Al Jazeera, to make propaganda videos such as this from their own media committee called As-Sahab, which would promote these videos and send them out to the internet, and also share them to media, to the media. And it was like, wow, this guy's right in your face. He's telling you we're attacking you. It's really unique in its own way when you think about the psychology of a criminal. We don't see this with La Cosa Nostra or international criminal organizations. But when it comes to bin Laden and Al-Qaeda and terrorism organizations, this way forward, they would tell you before the operation even commenced that here's the reason why we're attacking you. It's really fascinating.
Jihad.
There's
Pakistani
documentaries
journalist
to the
Rahim
left.
ul Yusufzai traveled to Afghanistan to attend that press conference.
We spent about 5 hours with him. We interviewed him. In this press conference, he announced the creation of the International Islamic Front for Jihad against the US and Israel. And he said that Al-Qaeda was merging in this front.
Feel like this. I
That
never
very
saw
day.
this video before.
Bin Laden published a 12-page declaration of war against the
rare.
United States. The CIA Bin Laden unit was impressed.
It was a learned document. It wasn't.
Right, now listen, there were two founders. One in 1996, which was in response to US soldiers stationed in Mecca and Medina, the two holiest sites in all of Islam, where bin Laden says we need to kill American military to get them off the lands of Islam. In 1998, a second fatwa, this time using members of Dr. Ayman al-Zawahiri, Rashid something from the Egyptian Islamic Jihad, I forgot his name, and somebody else that was involved in creating a group called the World Islamic Union or the World Islamic Front. And these are people that are not qualified to give fatwas. They're not recognized theologians. Bin Laden and Dr. Ahmed al-Zawahiri and Rifat Taha, that's his name, I think. Um, they're not recognized by the Sunni or Shia cleric community or the Ummah itself, right? The congregation of Muslims worldwide. These are terrorists, and they have nothing to do with the religion of Islam. They use Islam to basically try and recruit young, poor, uneducated Arabs and foreigners to join and fight against the West. And you won't see this with Persians or Alawites or Sufis, not so much in Shias, to join these like martyrdom groups. Because one thing about religious fundamentalism is that they would rather persuade people who are not educated, people who are poor and subjugated by the state, and to use that anger, rage, and lacking of intellect to make emotional decisions. Usually, those are the wrong decisions to make.
A wild man saying, "I declare war against you." It was a very reasoned document, and I think that's what caught the eye of most of the people who were working against bin Laden, that this guy is something different than we had seen before. How was it received in Washington? It was blown off.
Yeah, he's right
bin
about
Laden
that.
and what power is going to declare war on the United States.
See, Shore is correct about this, all right? So the State Department under the Clinton administration basically would get these briefings, right? National security briefings or a principals meeting leaders of the Defense Department and intelligence services, right? And usually the Secretary of State will be there, and this information goes right to the president in regards to what are the threats to national security. Well, when they start hearing bin Laden and these Mujahideen fighters, the Clinton administration, what do we know about Al Qaeda? Nothing, right? They're getting their intelligence from Louis Freeh, the director of the FBI, Richard Clark, the counterterrorism director, Michael Scheuer and George Tenet, the director of the CIA, and I don't know what the director of the NSA was at the time, but yeah, there you have it, right? Are they giving all the information to these principals? Probably not. Why? They're hoarding information about what? To collect more information about the group and to conduct operations. What are those operations? Probably clandestine, to try and infiltrate these groups, to try and gather intelligence, because information is power. And by not sharing information, you're not sharing power. This is the reason why I believe in producing videos like this or content that is informative, because I believe that power belongs in the hands of the people and not for the select few. That's why I don't deal with speculation or wild conspiracy.
By 1998, there was a new power allied with bin Laden. The Taliban had seized control of Afghanistan and were imposing draconian religious laws on the population. Mullah Omar, the reclusive head of the Taliban, protected bin Laden as a guest in his country, but even he worried that Al-Qaeda was becoming a state within a state.
Mullah Omar called me from Kandahar saying, "Were you in this press conference in Khost with bin Laden?" I said, "Yes." He said, "How did you go there?" I said, "We were taken by a Kashmiri Mujahideen group. We were smuggled across the border." He said, "Did you have visa?" I said, "No." And he said, "How come he gave a press conference in my country?" He said, "There can be only one ruler of this country. It's either me or bin Laden."
Just 20 kilometers outside Kandahar, Afghanistan, is a former agricultural compound named Tarnak Farm. American bombing reduced it to rubble after 9/11, because for 4 years, this was the home of Osama bin Laden. He moved in here at the insistence of Mullah Omar, who wanted to keep a closer eye on him.
That's true. Now, after the embassy bombings of 1998, it brought a lot of heat to Afghanistan because now bin Laden and the United States are basically known to each other. And so the Clinton administration was really forced to make a decision about sending military strikes against bin Laden in Afghanistan. This put a lot of pressure on the Taliban, who then basically put him under house arrest in Tarnak Farms, but without Mullah Omar's knowledge and without much of the Al Qaeda organization in knowledge of the planes operation that was proposed by Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, right? Um, and there's this video with Mohammed Atta and Ziad Jarrah that doesn't have sound. And that video was taken here in January of 2000 at Tarnak Farms.
In 1998, the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency started tracking bin Laden. The CIA used satellite photography and local spies to follow his every move.
It's an exaggeration, but he was almost like a blue-collar guy. He'd get his lunch pail in the morning and leave Tarnak Farm and drive up to Kandahar and check on his businesses and have lunch and deal with Mullah Omar and come back at the end of the day.
The CIA developed a plan to arrest bin Laden and bring him to the U.S. to stand trial. A team of Afghan commandos was hired for the operation. In charge was the CIA's station chief in Islamabad, Gary Schroen.
So the plan would
Okay, so this was called Operation Jawbreaker, right? I've written articles about this. I talked about this extensively in my earlier videos. I read the book, which was excellent, by Gary Bernstein, who replaced Schroen later on. And this was a joint venture between U.S. Special Forces and the CIA Special Activities Division, along with people from Uzbekistan and Waziristan, to try and gather as much intelligence about members of the Taliban and Al Qaeda. And it was a capture or kill order against Osama bin Laden. Now, when they're going to President Clinton, this White House staff team, there's CIA proposing these ideas, and the Pentagon is basically rejecting them. We're not, an assassination company. The CIA, remember on the church committee hearings, they had a lot of pressure and a lot of restrictions about how to conduct, black operations, right? So everybody was hesitant on pulling the trigger, so to speak, against bin Laden, and look what happened.
would have called for about 35 or 40 of these Afghan fighters to sneak into the camp. We knew the three houses
First
that
time
bin
I'm seeing
Laden
Gary Schroen.
owned
never saw his
personally.
face.
Then he had his wives stationed in it. He
Right,
rotated
the video,
between
right.
those three houses when he was there. So we would attack those three houses, trying to do it with the minimum amount
I
of,
believe he passed away.
noise or whatever. Grab him, and then they had a way of, there was a culvert that ran under the wall, and take him out that way.
The Tarnak Farm kidnap operation was scheduled for the night of June 23, 1998. Then, just before it was to go ahead, there was a debate at the White House about how many people were likely to be killed.
I said, well, there will be a gunfight. There's no way that once an alarm is raised that these guys aren't going to pour out of their homes with AK-47s and all. And so I think that was one of the probably the deciding factor in when the plan was presented, where it was just simply finally rejected.
While the U.S. government hesitated about attacking Osama bin Laden, he attacked them.
So here you have it, right? You have this indecision, an indecisive Clinton administration trying to protect life, right? But basically didn't, if the operation was a failure, it would go back on the Clinton administration. Who's getting a lot of pressure from people within the neocon community who are basically trying to persuade them to attack Iraq at this point. And then later on, there was an organization called the Project for New American Century under David Wormser, Bill Kristol, and Robert Kagan, where they would basically write an outline about what the U.S. military needs in the future regarding the country, regarding the West's imperialistic goals, the future. And they said, saved outside a terrorist polarizing attack like a Pearl Harbor, this is going to take time, Whereas if a giant attack, a terrorist attack, were to take place, we can actually respond in kind and start implementing the ideals of people like Paul Wolfowitz and Richard Pearl and basically all these dual Israeli citizens that make up the Project for New American Century. These are nationalists, Zionists that have uh, very nefarious goals for the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and the United States in general. And look at the current times we're in now. I mean, look, what's happening in Syria is mirroring what happened in Afghanistan in 1979. Now, whereas we once praised Bin Laden as a future leader of the Muslims in regards to the fight against the evil communists. Here we have a notable head chopper in Abu Muhammad al-Jalani, leader of the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and also the former leader of Jabhat al-Nusra, an al-Qaeda affiliate in Syria, who's killed tens of thousands of people, mostly Muslims. And CNN is basically calling him a peacemaker, a refugee, a welcoming refugee against the evil communist socialist in Bashar al-Assad, and the people are falling for it all over again. Whereas, unlike Bin Laden and Al Qaeda is now established in Afghanistan. That wasn't the case under Bin Laden when he relocated to Afghanistan. He started rebuilding them there. Not only that, just like with Operation Cyclone, with the billions of dollars in military aid through the black market going to these, groups, all around the world. That's exactly what's happening in Europe and exactly what's happening in Afghanistan. Remember, we left billions of dollars of weapons behind regarding, Trump's administration abandoning and Biden, being the man who basically who was in office that wrote the executive order for the United States to get out of the country without any type of restrictions on the Taliban. Taliban took over the country in record time and now have members of Al Qaeda within their government. So it's a caliphate. In the same instance, what we're seeing in Syria under Jalani. Now imagine the Taliban and Al Qaeda join forces with Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, and then you got Al Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, Al Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, Al Qaeda in North Africa with Boko Haram and Al Sahab. And if there's anything left of Abu Sayyaf in the Philippines, you can see the danger here, unlike what we've seen before under Bin Laden. All right. Listen, guys, have a great weekend. And thank you for tuning in. And I'll see you in the next video. Take care.